The Terran military has some of the most iconic units in all of gaming, from expendable infantry pumped full of combat stims to capital ships packing planet-cracking firepower. Every unit tells a story about humanity's desperate, scrappy, and occasionally unhinged approach to survival. So today, I'm breaking down every Terran unit and everything that makes them tick, starting with the one nobody ever thanks, SCV. The structural compact vehicle hits for 5 damage. 5. You could sneeze on a Zergling and do more, but here's the thing. Without this little hard hat wearing blue collar hero, you don't get an economy, you don't get an army, you don't get a single battle cruiser. Every empire in StarCraft history was built on the back of a guy in a mech suit holding a welding torch, and that welding torch is doing serious work. A single SCV can take a nearly destroyed building to fully operational in seconds. Construction speed improved about 30% between the first game and StarCraft 2, which canonically reflects iterative colonial engineering upgrades. Fancy way of saying they finally read the manual, but the real tragedy, each SCV represents significant training investment. These aren't random civilians, they're trained for combat zone deployment, and yet replacing one costs you basically nothing. You just queue up another one and forget the last guy existed, which is, you know, not ideal. But if you think a 5 damage worker unit is underwhelming, wait until you meet the guy Terran Command actually hands a rifle to Marine. Every Terran player knows this unit. The Marine is the grunt, the expendable frontline soldier, the guy who gets a rifle and a pat on the back and is told to go die for the Dominion. But here's the thing, this expendable infantry unit is secretly one of the most tactically sophisticated units in the entire game. Each Marine carries a C-14 Gauss rifle dealing 6 damage per shot. That sounds pathetic until you put 40 of them together and watch an entire Zerg army evaporate in about 3 seconds. Their movement speed combined with a 5-unit attack range means skilled players can kite slower units indefinitely, dealing constant damage while taking 0 in return. Then there's Stimpack. You literally inject your own soldiers with combat drugs that shred their health in exchange for 50% faster attack speed. Trade your own blood for victory. That's not just a game mechanic, that's the entire Terran philosophy in a single button press. In StarCraft 1, Marines were fragile cannon fodder you threw away by the hundreds. In StarCraft 2, they became legitimate tactical investments worthy of real micro attention. The community still argues about whether Marine heavy compositions represent peak efficiency or a crutch that falls apart against specialized units. Meanwhile, in the lore, these soldiers are psychologically conditioned recruits fed propaganda about how military service is their golden ticket, which is, you know, not ideal. But if you think Marines are aggressive, wait until you meet the unit that was literally designed to jump over your walls and shoot your workers in the face. Reaper. Every Terran base has that one unit that exists purely to ruin someone else's morning. The Reaper is that unit. Jetpack wearing, dual pistol wielding, and absolutely determined to show up at your mineral line uninvited. Each Reaper packs twin pistols dealing 8 damage per shot, and here's the thing, they fire sequentially, not simultaneously, so you're getting peppered with consistent staggered damage rather than one big burst. The Reaper's entire job is to kill workers and leave before anyone can do anything about it, and the grappling hook is what makes that possible. This is the only standard Terran unit that can scale cliffs. That mineral line your opponent tucked behind a nice safe ledge. Not safe anymore. The Reaper just climbs up, shoots 4 SCVs, and hops back down like nothing happened. Which is, you know, not ideal for the person losing SCVs. They cost 50 minerals and 50 gas. That gas cost is the real conversation. In the early game, 50 gas is a genuine investment, and you need to justify it by actually killing workers. If your Reaper shows up and accomplishes nothing, you've basically donated resources to the concept of looking cool. The community still argues whether early Reaper pressure is genuinely optimal or just something people do, because flying over cliffs feels good. Honestly, both sides make valid points. But if the Reaper is the unit that shows up uninvited, the next unit is the one that makes sure you can't leave. Marauder. If the Marine is the guy you send to handle everything, the Marauder is the guy you send when everything goes wrong. Specifically, when everything going wrong involves heavy armor. Here's the thing about Marauders that makes them genuinely terrifying against the right targets. Each Punisher cannon deals 10 damage per shot, which sounds reasonable enough, but they get a flat bonus of 10 additional damage against armored units. So anything tagged as armored, which includes roaches, stalkers, Thors, ultralisks, basically anything that looks looks like it could survive a car crash, just melts. It's like wearing a sign that says, "Please hit me twice as hard." A pack of Marauders absolutely shreds through fortified positions that would chew through Marines like tissue paper. Now, that power comes with trade-offs. At 100 minerals and 25 gas per unit, they're not exactly cheap infantry. You can't just mass them the way you spam Marines across the map, but their 125 health pool means they can actually survive a stim pack without immediately regretting every life choice. Marines pop stim with 45 health and basically start writing their wills. The weird part? Despite being literally designed to kill armored stuff, Marauders were historically underutilized in StarCraft 2's early competitive seasons. Players spent years arguing over composition ratios while the unit just sat there, doing exactly what it was built to do, waiting for people to notice. But if the Marauder is the brute force solution to the armor problem, the next unit takes the opposite approach entirely. Ghost. On paper, the Ghost looks underwhelming. 10 damage per shot from a C10 canister rifle, a Marine with a fancy coat. You'd look at those numbers and wonder why anyone would spend 200 minerals and 100 gas on something that shoots like a slightly annoyed librarian. But the rifle isn't the point. The Ghost is a walking war crime delivery system. Ghosts generate a cloaking field that renders them completely invisible until they attack or use an ability, meaning you can walk one directly into an enemy base, park it next to their most important structure, and just wait, which is, you know, not ideal for the other guy. Then there's Snipe, 130 damage to any biological target, ignoring armor completely. That infestor your opponent spent all game babysitting? Gone. High Templar about to storm your entire army, deleted before it gets the chance. Against squishy high-value targets, it's basically an assassination button, but the real star is the nuke. 300 damage to units, 500 to structures, across roughly a 7-unit radius. That's not an ability, that's a tactical reset button. And the best part? The moment that nuclear launch detected warning hits, your opponent panics. They scatter units, abandon positions, lose focus. The nuke doesn't even have to land to do its job. Here's the thing though, Blizzard has tweaked or overhauled nearly every Terran unit since StarCraft 2 launched. The Ghost got changes too, snipe damage adjustments, supply cost shifts, a health bump, but the core identity never changed. 15 years of patches and the design team kept circling back to the same fantasy. Invisible soldier, big snipe, bigger nuke. They tuned the numbers but never once questioned the kit. That's confidence. But if the Ghost is surgical precision, the next unit is the exact opposite. Pure chaos on wheels. Hellion. This thing is basically a dune buggy that someone strapped a flamethrower to and called it a military vehicle. And honestly, it's one of the best units in the game. The Hellion is the fastest ground unit in the entire Terran roster, clocking in at 4.25 movement speed. Nothing else on wheels or legs comes close. It costs 100 minerals and 0 gas, which means you can start pumping these out before your opponent has even figured out what they're doing with their life. Those twin Hellfire Cyclone cannons deliver 8 to 16 damage depending on distance and splash interactions, which doesn't sound like much until you realize it hits everything standing near the target. One Hellion rolling into a pack of Zerglings is less of a fight and more of a barbecue, but here's where it gets interesting. The Hellion can transform into a Hellbat, which is essentially the same vehicle deciding it wants to be a completely different unit. The Hellbat drops the speed, shortens the range, but bumps its health from 90 to 135 and swaps to a close-range brawling pattern. It's like watching a sports car turn into a pickup truck mid-highway. The wildest part is that the Hellion had 0 precedent before StarCraft 2. No prior version, no spiritual predecessor. The devs just sat down one day and said, what if we made a unit that's fast, cheap, and on fire? Which, you know, worked out pretty well. But if you think a flamethrower on wheels is scary, wait until you see what happens when Terran decides to park a cannon and stop moving entirely. Siege Tank. This is the unit that doesn't just fight for territory, it becomes territory. The Siege Tank is less of a vehicle and more of a philosophical statement about Terran warfare. And that statement is come anywhere near this patch of dirt and I will delete you from existence. In mobile mode, you're looking at a respectable 20 damage per attack. Solid, nothing to write home about. But the second you lock this thing into siege mode, everything changes. You sacrifice all mobility, the tank plants itself into the ground, and suddenly you're throwing 40 damage per attack at ranges so far away, your targets literally cannot shoot back. Which is, you know, not ideal for them, but here's the thing that makes Siege siege tanks genuinely terrifying. That splash damage. Every volley explodes outward and catches everything nearby. One shot lands in a clump of Zerglings, and suddenly there are 0 Zerglings. An entire group of fragile units just evaporates because they had the audacity to stand near each other. The siege tank has a monopoly on making your opponent regret their unit positioning. At 150 minerals and 125 gas with 150 health, it's not cheap, but you're paying for the ability to turn any choke point into an absolute kill zone. You don't need more units than your enemy, you just need better ground and a row of siege tanks pointed at the only way in. The community still argues about whether siege tanks are mandatory in every late game composition. You technically can skip them, the same way you can technically eat soup with a fork. But if you think planting your flag and daring them to come is impressive, wait until you see the unit that never stops moving. Cyclone. Every roster has that one unit that showed up late and never quite figured out where to sit. For the Terrans, that's the Cyclone. Introduced in Legacy of the Void in 2015, the Cyclone was Blizzard's answer to a specific community complaint. Terran mid-game was too rigid, too dependent on siege tanks, so Blizzard gave them a fast mechanical unit with a completely unique engagement mechanic, and then spent the next several years trying to figure out if it actually worked. Here's the thing about the Cyclone, its lock-on ability channels 150 damage over roughly 2 seconds onto a single targeted unit. That forces a completely different engagement pattern than anything else in the Terran arsenal. You're not sieging up, you're not stutter stepping, you're locking on and chasing, which means your opponent has to actively respond or lose the unit. It's harassment with a leash attached. The Cyclone costs 150 minerals and 100 gas. That's basically siege tank money for a unit that plays nothing like a siege tank. And that's kind of the problem. You're paying premium prices for a unit whose role keeps shifting every few patches. Blizzard tweaked the Cyclone's cooldowns, damage values, and engagement range across multiple major patches. They adjusted it so many times it started feeling less like balance tuning and more like a unit still searching for its identity. Pro players consistently reached for traditional compositions over Cyclone-heavy builds, treating it more like a situational tool than a core strategy piece. The Cyclone isn't bad, it's just the new kid who keeps getting told to try a different extracurricular. But if you think an identity crisis is rough, wait until you meet a unit that buries itself underground and waits for you to walk over it. Widow Mine. The Widow Mine is the meanest thing Terran commanders can do to someone without looking them in the eye. It burrows underground, goes completely invisible, and then just waits. The moment anything wanders too close, it detonates for 125 damage in a radius of about 2.5 units. No warning, no negotiation, just an explosion and a whole lot of regret. Here's the thing, this unit doesn't just kill stuff, it changes how your opponent thinks. The second they know Widow Mines are on the field, every movement across the map becomes a calculated risk. Every attack path gets second guessed. Every expansion timing gets delayed by the paranoia of what if there's one buried right there. That's not a unit, that's psychological warfare with a 75 mineral, 25 gas price tag. And that price tag matters because it makes the Widow Mine one of the most cost-efficient defensive tools in the entire Terran arsenal. The anti-air applications are where things get genuinely disgusting. Position 1 along a predictable flight corridor and a single detonation can wipe out multiple transport ships simultaneously. Every unit inside, gone. One mine. That's the kind of trade ratio that makes accountants weep with joy. But it's not broken, and that's entirely because of the cooldown. After detonation, it needs an extended recharge before firing again. One shot, then you're sitting there like a very expensive rock. The community stays divided on whether heavy Widow Mine investment is smart defensive spending or a resource trap that starves you of units that can actually fight back. Both sides have a point, but if you think a buried explosive is intimidating, wait until you see what happens when Terran engineers decided to just build the biggest mech they possibly could. Thor. The Thor is the biggest, meanest machine in the Terran garage. 400 health points, dual 250mm cannons pumping out 30 damage per shot, and a silhouette that makes everything else on the battlefield look like a toy. On paper, it's the final word in mechanized warfare. But here's the thing, it costs 300 minerals and 200 gas. That's 500 resources wrapped up in a single unit, making it the most expensive mechanical investment you can make. And competitive players? They look at that price tag, look at what 3 siege siege tanks could do instead, and quietly build 3 siege tanks. You're paying premium for intimidation that cheaper alternatives can often replicate. Now, the Thor does have a trick worth mentioning. It can swap between 2 anti-air modes: explosive payload for shredding clumps of light flyers, and high impact payload for punching single heavy air targets in the face. Combined with its permanent ground attack, you get a unit that can actually adapt to shifting battlefield conditions rather than just standing there looking expensive. Canonically, these things are the apex of Terran mechanized warfare, deployed in major operations requiring sustained bombardment, the kind of unit you send when you want a problem to stop existing. And the community absolutely loves arguing about whether Thors should be mandatory in every late game composition or remain the situational counterpick they currently are. The answer, frustratingly, is somewhere in the middle. The Thor hits like nothing else in the roster, but efficiency is king in competitive play, and 500 resources is a lot to gamble on one unit that can get kited by a sufficiently motivated Mutalisk flock. But if you think the Thor has identity issues, wait until you meet the Banshee, a unit that turned annoying into an entire playstyle. Banshee. There's nothing in StarCraft quite like the sound of a Banshee arriving at your mineral line when you have 0 detection available. Nothing. It's the audio equivalent of finding out your house is on fire from the smell. The Banshee is a specialized air-to-ground harassment platform, and specialized is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. This thing exists for one purpose: show up invisible, delete everything important, and leave before anyone figures out what happened. Its backlash rocket launchers pump out 22 damage per shot against ground targets with a rate of fire that can only be described as personally offensive. At 150 minerals and 100 gas, it's a moderate investment, but the return on that investment is genuinely disgusting. Here's where the Banshee earns its reputation. Cloak field generators grant temporary invisibility, and a cloaked Banshee squadron arriving at an undefended base is less of a military engagement and more of a crime scene. A single group can erase missile turrets, engineering bays, and factories before the opponent even pulls up their production tab. The entire design philosophy is surgical strike doctrine. Get in, eliminate high-value targets, get out. Repeat until your opponent Alt F4s. But here's the thing, the Banshee is a pure predator, and predators have a very specific problem. They are absolutely terrible at being prey. 0 anti-air capability, none. The moment an opponent fields proper detection and any air-to-air response, your invisible Angel of Death becomes a very expensive, very slow-moving target. One Viking squadron and suddenly your 150-100 investment is a debris field. Unchecked, a Banshee will dismantle an entire economy. Checked, it's a donation to your opponent's kill feed. But if you think a cloaked harassment ship is the peak of Terran air power, wait until you meet the thing that makes entire planets nervous. Battle Cruiser. This is the one, the unit that every single Terran player dreams about building and every single opponent dreads seeing on the battlefield. The battlecruiser isn't just a unit, it's a statement. It's the Terran Dominion looking at the cold void of space and saying, yeah, we own that too. 50 health points. Let that sink in. You could throw an entire squadron of anti-air units at this thing and it would just sit there, absorbing punishment like it's mildly inconvenienced. Most units in StarCraft fold under concentrated fire. The battlecruiser asks for seconds, but the health pool isn't even the scary part. The scary part is the Yamato cannon. 300 damage. Charged up, locked on, delivered with the subtlety of a freight train through a shopping mall. That's not a weapon, that's a deletion tool. Most units in the game don't even have 300 health. You're not damaging them, you're removing them from existence. One shot, gone. Hey, where'd my carrier go? Nowhere. It's nowhere now. And here's the thing about battlecruisers that stats alone can't capture: the psychological warfare. The moment one of these enters the airspace, the entire game changes. Your opponent stops executing their strategy and starts panicking about yours. Every decision they make from that point forward is a reaction to your battlecruiser. That's not just a unit advantage, that's mind control with extra steps. Now, 400 minerals and 300 gas is no joke. That's the single most expensive unit in the entire Terran roster, and the community remains genuinely split on whether there they're a viable late game strategy, or just a really expensive way to lose all your resources at once. Tournament data across multiple StarCraft 2 seasons shows their viability fluctuating like a heart monitor, sometimes dominant, sometimes completely absent from competitive play, which is, you know, reassuring. But none of that changes what the battle cruiser represents. It's the final form, the logical conclusion of everything the Terran war machine builds toward. Some SCV somewhere mined the minerals, built the supply depot, funded the starport, and out of that starport came this absolute monster carrying a cannon that erases things from reality, from Wrench to Yamato. That's the Terran story. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.